Today on the Gestalt IT Rundown, we're focused on election security, just like everybody is. We're talking about the CISA's new OPSEC guide for elections officials and what it really means and how it's going to impact the world of election security. We're also covering a few other interesting tidbits, including Japan saying goodbye to floppy disks forever, NetApp's new focus on AI and data resilience, Broadcom's launch of the VMware Omnissa assets, billions and billions and billions of passwords published on the dark web, our good friend Douglas Gourlay heading over to Qumulo to become CEO, and finally, Cloudflare's automatic shielding of users from data harvesting AI bots. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, where each time we meet, we run down the IT news of the week with a variable degree of snarkiness. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett, and joining me this week, since Tom is away for Networking Field Day, is my co-host, Mr. Jack Poller. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thanks for having me, Stephen, and I hope after the show you'll join me with a drink in honor of National Pina Colada Day.
And you know what else is great about today? Today is also National Kitten Day. And if you don't like kittens, you've got problems. So let's take a look at some of the news of the week in enterprise tech. Japan's government has officially ended the use of floppy disks in all of its systems, marking a big step in modernizing its bureaucratic process. This move comes after a dedicated campaign to phase out floppy disks and update over 1,000 different regulations and presumably systems. We've seen floppy disks vanish around the industry, but they're still in place in some spots. What do you think, Jack? Are we all saying goodbye to floppy disks?
One would hope that that's the case, but unfortunately is not the case. And I think Japan has done a really good job. They set out about 2 years ago, right after COVID sort of died, to get rid of floppy disks because they had actually put in laws, over 1,000 laws, mandating the use of floppy disks in various different parts of the government. And the interesting thing about Japan is they have a minister of digital government or digital information. And that minister said, we really got to get rid of floppy disks because Sony stopped making floppy disks in 2011, I believe. Right. So they're really not a need for them anymore. They got rid of 1,033 laws and left one law in place on floppy disks. And that's actually mandating how you recycle floppy disks. Unfortunately, we've learned that there are other parts of the world where floppy disks are still in use. For instance, San Francisco's Muni rail system, its entire computer system has to boot off of a floppy drive, and they have no plans to upgrade that system until 2030, so another 6 years, which I find truly stunning that we're still using this technology that long and that we can't afford or have no desire to upgrade that. And it really leads us into this concept of technical debt and mandated technical debt. In the United States, we've got some health information privacy laws called HIPAA, and they actually control how we communicate private health information. And there are certain ways on how you can use fax machines. So the healthcare industry is still highly dependent on fax machines and doesn't use email or other forms of electronic communication to communicate health information together. We also see Europe just mandated the use of USB-C for charging your cell phones or laptops or video cameras or regular cameras. And while that's great today, how long is it going to take before USB-C is outdated tech and is no longer available, but is still mandated? NetApp is a familiar face in the data center, and the company has reached into the cloud in recent years. But the storage-focused company has not really been part of the AI data infrastructure conversation until now. The latest announcements show NetApp taking Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG, seriously, with advanced storage features directed to support modern LLM workloads. Can NetApp make the pivot to AI like many of the storage upstarts have done?
Well, this has been one of the big challenges in the storage industry is how do you keep storage relevant and up to date with what's going on in the trends toward cloud and now the trends toward the AI information factory. Uh, Certainly, many of NetApp's competitors, especially of the smaller upstarts, have really made hay in the AI training market. We've seen a lot of them talking about how their products can integrate with AI training, how they can extend data from the data center or hybrid cloud into the AI training cloud that's being offered by many service providers, and how their systems are uniquely positioned to serve data into that market. Well, as we've talked about on the rundown quite a lot, the world of AI is transitioning rapidly from being training focused to being application focused. Essentially, the time has come for us to take these models that we've built that actually perform pretty well now and put them into practice, put them into use, start getting some practical value from them. One of the ways that that's happening is what's called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Now, what this means is essentially you're giving your LLM a programmatic interface to a data set. So when you ask it a question, you can specify, I want you to find the answer in this searchable index. Now, that could be a search engine, it could be a document set, or it could be some other kind of structured corporate data. NetApp is already the home to a lot of corporate data, and so it makes sense that the company would be pivoting in this direction. All of the other storage companies in the industry are rapidly moving in this direction as well, because I think that many of them see that training is an important workload, but just one of the workloads. So, what is NetApp doing? Well, specifically, they're trying to make their product more useful and more interesting to users of the cloud. NetApp already has an incredible footprint with their ONTAP operating system in Microsoft Azure, as well as AWS and Google Cloud. In fact, at the recent Cloud Field Day event, Google went out of their way to mention the value of the NetApp platform for Google Cloud customers with enterprise workloads. Well, that's what they're doing now with AI as well. So NetApp announced their Blue XP service previously. Now they're talking about including capabilities for databases, for VMware, for Gen AI, and storage integration in AWS. They're talking about advanced ransomware and protection, especially in Azure. And they're talking about putting an AI toolkit together, a Gen AI toolkit that is now GA, to connect with Vertex AI in Google Cloud, so that you can use the Gen AI toolkit there or in Azure or other places to build Gen AI applications on a NetApp blueprint. They've also got reference architectures for using FSX for ONTAP on AWS Bedrock, for example. There's a lot of different things in this announcement from a technical standpoint, but the through line is that NetApp is trying to position what they've already got, which is essentially the industry's leading enterprise storage platform, and what they've already got in terms of being the storage platform of choice in the cloud for enterprises, and bring that into the AI world. Now, what I didn't hear a lot of is how exactly the data from those systems are going to be integrated with data platforms with AI applications, et cetera. So certainly they did talk about RAG, but I didn't hear any specific metadata or vector search or anything like that from them. Maybe I missed it, or maybe that's something else that NetApp is working on now. We're definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. Broadcom has sold its end user computing division to KKR for $4 billion, forming a new company called Omnissa as a standalone company focused on digital workspace solutions like Workspace ONE and Horizon. This move marks Broadcom's strategic shift toward concentrating the private cloud sector and shedding non-core assets. Omnissa aims to innovate and expand in this market under KKR's ownership, emphasizing customer-centric strategies and product development. Let's bring Keith Townsend, the CTO advisor for the Futurum Group, into the show for his opinion on the launch of Omnissa using this VMware IP.
Hey, thanks, guys. This is something that we kind of expected, right? Broadcom signaled that they were going to, more than signal, they just outright said they were going to divest non-core business units. If we remember way back when VMware acquired these assets, including Horizon, etc., they made a really big deal out of building essentially a $1 billion business. Sanjay Poonen led that business unit for several years before eventually becoming the COO of VMware. It was a critical business unit for VMware in the past. What does this mean for customers? From a technology perspective, I'm personally curious as how Omnissa is going to handle the transition from a technology perspective. All of these technologies VMware had wrapped around vSphere, specifically the end user management stuff. The mobile device management, they started to consolidate the portal. They're now calling that UEM. And as administrators and architects, we have to start thinking through if we are going to divest from VMware or look at other options, is Omnissa going to be an option for us when it comes to our virtual desktops, end user compute in general? Are they going to begin to separate out from that vSphere ecosystem and support potentially Hyper-V, KVM, etc., or will they continue to be tied at the hip? From a initial perspective, they'll work out the back end on licensing, etc. But again, when it's time to renew, we're already in a subscription managed motion. Are we going to continue with subscriptions, or will we be able to return to perpetual licenses? Citrix is doing the opposite. They're staying subscription or moving to subscription. So unfortunately, I think subscriptions are here to stay. Really interesting move. As now that it happened, again, we expected it to happen. Now that it has happened, a bunch of technical and operational questions have to be answered. Back to you guys.
Well, thanks very much for joining the show, Keith, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Field Day event or maybe joining us here on the Rundown. In a major cybersecurity breach, a hacker has uploaded nearly 10 billion stolen passwords to a popular crime forum. Dubbed RockU 2024, this massive compilation of plain text passwords spans data breaches from the last 2 decades, posing significant risks for credential stuffing and brute force attacks. If you know what the passwords look like, well, then you can try those passwords and see if they work. Jack, should we still be reusing passwords?
Absolutely not. And, before I started focusing on cybersecurity, I, like most other people, had a couple of passwords that I used, and I used those everywhere. And I actually got caught in a credential stuffing attack where somebody had stolen the passwords from some random social networking site that I had logged into and used that. I had used that same password at Costco, and they went out and bought about $15,000 worth of goods from Costco. And so I had to spend some time with both Costco and with my credit card provider, sort of dealing with all that. So, password reuse and credential stuffing attacks are a really big problem. Now, the passwords here come from about 2 decades worth of breaches and are a collection of many different breaches over time. But this latest collection sort of adds 1.5 billion passwords to some other existing collections. So now we have in one spot almost 10 billion passwords. So this is getting a lot of press. And a lot of people are now starting to pay attention to it and understanding sort of the risks of password reuse, because you will see the number of credential stuffing attacks go up. So I sort of look at this from both a personal level and sort of the business level. On a personal level, one of the things we have to do is stop reusing passwords. And the best and easiest way to do that is to use a password manager. There are about 10 or 15 available, including those built into Google Chrome or Microsoft's Edge or Apple's web browser that you can use. And that allows you to not have to remember passwords. So you can use a unique password for every site. And you can also use long and complicated passwords. that are harder for people to guess or to brute force attack. The other thing you can do is when sites start offering to use multi-factor authentication or passwordless authentication, select those options because those drastically increase your security and prevent you from getting attacked. On a corporate level, I want organizations to really start thinking about making multi-factor authentication or passwordless authentication mandatory. At this late date, the technology is extremely solid, and it is very important to make it mandatory, not optional, so that all of your accounts and credentials are protected, and this will prevent credential stuffing attacks. About 2 years ago, I talked to the CISO of a consumer financial application, and they had 50 million users. And when they enabled two-factor authentication, they saw the number of attacks drop 98% in 2 weeks. So it really can increase your security and reduce your risk. Qumulo is a quiet success in the storage world, growing to unicorn status with a scale-out distributed storage platform that has found success in hybrid cloud and for AI workloads. Douglas Gourlay was an Arista Networks employee, helping lead the network upstart to become a real challenger. The storage company hopes that Gourlay can challenge the industry with new leadership and ideas. You knew Douglas Gourlay, Arista, and Qumulo from Tech Field Day, Stephen. So what's your take?
We don't usually cover executive changes on the rundown because a lot of the time they're not all that interesting to our audience. But this time I think it might be. So let's take a look at what this means. First off, who is this guy? Well, Douglas Gourlay wasn't just an Arista employee. He was one of the people who drove the vision and strategy for Arista. In fact, many of the things that you think make Arista special were things that Doug either led or seized upon from the other incredible people that they put together at that company. So although if you go to the Best of Tech Field Day video series, you'll see people like Andy Bechtelsheim and Ken Duda representing Arista incredibly in videos, Doug was behind the scenes for a lot of that Tech Field Day stuff. And frankly, behind the scenes for a lot of the development of some of the company's smarter moves. Now, I've known him for a very long time, as you can guess, and it was wonderful to be able to get a little bit of a heads up of this move from him. We've also seen Qumulo many times in the past. In fact, they presented at Storage Field Day a few times in 2015 and 2020. And Qumulo is a company, as you say, that has quietly grown to take quite an interesting position in the market. Essentially, Qumulo has a storage platform that runs anywhere and does the kind of things that you wish a storage platform would do, but spoiler alert, most of them don't. Most storage is actually fairly difficult to integrate at scale. Most storage is fairly difficult to scale. Most storage is fairly difficult to move around thanks to data gravity. Well, Qumulo attacks basically all that stuff. You can install the client using just an RPM on basically any platform from x86 and yes, ARM, that's right. You can build massive scale-out systems with it. You can use those systems to span data from data center to hybrid cloud to wherever you need that storage to be. And it allegedly, at least, I haven't used it personally, but it seems to just kind of work. And that, I think, is one of those magical ingredients that somebody like Doug can take and run with. We're in a stage now where storage is rapidly losing relevance as a special part of the industry. I mean, basically, people have applications and the applications need data, and there's supposed to be data infrastructure under those applications that just sort of works. I think most people would be surprised to find that storage doesn't just sort of work in most cases. You have to do a lot of messing around with it, or you just basically hit it with a hammer and use some kind of incredible, NVMe, all flash, whatever, to make it work as well as you possibly can and hope that it doesn't break. Well, that's not great. So instead, using a data platform, a modern advanced data platform like Qumulo or one of their competitors, you can build out a modern storage infrastructure that does work. So I am actually really excited to see what happens here because, as I said, we've got a strong software foundation for storage that we has really been impressed by at Field Day. We've got a new breath of fresh air on the executive side running it from somebody who really has the ability to see the opportunity from this technology and apply that to customer needs. And basically, we've got a company that's already grown to unicorn status. So it's not like they're going to collapse any minute or something like that. They've got good investors. I think this is good news all around, not just for Qumulo, but for the whole industry. Cloudflare has introduced a new tool designed to combat the increasing challenge of AI bots scraping websites for data to train AI models. This initiative aims to prevent unauthorized data harvesting while ensuring that AI companies adhere to web scraping rules. This is a story that I have personally been following very closely because it's been infuriating that many of these AI bots haven't followed robots.txt and things like that. Jack, I know you're following this too. What do you think of this?
Well, let's first make sure we talk about the big problem, which is these big models, the LLMs like ChatGPT and all of this type of stuff, they are trained on billions and billions of pieces of content, separate pieces of content. And the only way they can be trained is to build up this corpus of data. The vendors have to collect that data by scraping it off the internet. Now, since the start of the web era, we have basically said that anything that was published, you can read on a website. And then there was a file, as you mentioned, called robots.txt that gave instructions to robots or tools that went and scraped websites that basically provided the rules of how you could use the data that you're accessing. Unfortunately, in their zeal to train these large models, the AI model builders have ignored robots.txt completely. And in fact, Microsoft's AI CEO, Mustafa Suleyman, basically said that anything is fair game. In fact, he said, quote, anyone can copy it, recreate with it, reproduce with it. That has been freeware if you like. That's been the understanding. So he's basically said, if you publish it and you don't protect it with gated login content, it's mine and I'll use it however you want. And that's not sort of the moral social contract we've been living under until this point. So that's really the big problem, is people are now concerned that their own intellectual property that they've created, whether it's the written word or images or photos or videos or what have you, that's going to be sucked into this giant LLM AI engine thingy and then spit back out as somebody else's work. So there's a big concern about that. And what Cloudflare has done is they've introduced a tool that will detect when it's an AI engine scraping your website and try to prevent that for Cloudflare's customers. The irony here is that in order for Cloudflare to do this, they developed an AI engine by looking at their customers' websites and traffic to do so. But I think this is a very good first attempt at really trying to rebalance and re-level the playing field between content creators and the AI engines who are using that content without compensation and without respect to copyrights or any other content protection, and just using that content willy-nilly. It also hints, though, at a future problem, which is that we now have a lot of AI-generated data on the publicly available net that is being scraped by AI engines to use as training data. So now the AI engines are training on their own output, which somehow I don't think is going to work well in the long run.
Now let's take a closer look at a story that's important not just in the IT world, but for the world in general. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, or CISA, for the United States, has just released a comprehensive guide to bolster operational security, what we in the biz call OPSEC, for elections officials. This guide aims to enhance the security of election infrastructure by offering detailed strategies for identifying and mitigating potential risks within the election context. Now, no matter where you are on the political spectrum and where you live in the world, I'm sure that you have heard about election-related risks. This is a very, very common topic that people are talking about everywhere. And it's one of the things I think that people are genuinely very concerned about. I think there's a lot of concern in this day and age when people constantly hear about how the computers are down, or somebody hacked my Facebook account, or hackers this, ransomware that. I think a lot of them are genuinely, honestly, earnestly worried that someone could do something that would upset the election. Now, it's really great that the United States has a government agency that's specifically focused on countering nation-state attackers. It's really great that this agency, from at least my perspective, is staffed by incredible people who are dedicated to doing this job. What does this say, Jack? Let's start with that. What are they recommending in the guide that we would use to combat election risks?
Well, I think the first thing that's good is the guide covers both sort of the technical and the non-technical. And it's really a high-level guide. It's only 6 pages, but it's really looking at the steps you would take about information security in general, understanding what is your critical information, what's your sensitive information, knowing where it is, looking at ways to protect it by understanding what the attacker's viewpoint is going to be. How is somebody going to use this information in a way that they shouldn't? How are they going to access it, use it, publish it? What are the threat models involved? And then how do you protect against those threat models? And how do you put in place programs and training to protect your system? And like I said, this applies not only to election security, but to anything involving information. And it's information security. And operational security is how do you run your operations? So we're talking also about how do election officials think about the election process and how do they manage that? From a technical perspective, I think, you talked a little bit about the fear people have, and it's really a fear of the unknown. Right now, particularly in the US, that the election systems are run primarily through electronic devices, and it's a closed environment. It's not publicly available what the systems are, how secure they are. There's very little information available. So there's a lot of fear of the unknown, and fear that, well, if they can hack my Facebook account, they can hack the election system, as you mentioned. So I think the first step that CISA has taken is to start talking about this publicly and saying we are thinking about these issues, and we are publishing and instructing election officials on how to think about it and how to manage the security of the election system.
So looking at the guide, one of the things that jumps out at me as a watcher of technology and also a watcher of politics is how non-political this guide is. Now, you might remember that the first director of CISA was that Chris Krebs, not Brian Krebs. They're not related. They have the same name. They're both in security. But anyway, yeah, Chris Krebs, he got fired because he added information to the CISA's website, counteracting myths about election interference that rubbed some politicians the wrong way. And so from the same agency that saw the head get fired for getting involved in a, let's say, political firestorm, we have a completely apolitical and frankly non-controversial guide to OPSEC. The principles that are spelled out here are the same principles, as you said, Jack, the same principles that a OPSEC consultant would give an enterprise tech company. They would basically say, here's what you need to do to protect yourself. You need to think about people, operations. You need to think about cybersecurity, about physical security. And you need to dive in to, and this is the important point in my point, you have to dive into what is realistic and what is really likely to be attacked, not what, the greatest worries or the fear-mongering is. So instead of thinking about what could theoretically go wrong that would push something in one way or another, you have to think about what is an adversary really going to do. And there are real risks here. And I think that that's the thing that we all have to be cognizant of. There are risks when you're using information systems generally. There's risks to election interference. And a lot of them are happening regularly and are being thwarted regularly by the same kind of things that we use in the enterprise. I'm sure that if there was open logins or things like that, they would get attacked like crazy if they weren't closed up. And I hope that they are closed up. Another thing that strikes me about election security, though, is when you're talking about who's running these elections, in many cases, these are not, in fact, probably most cases, these are not IT people. These are not people familiar with the world of OPSEC, and they don't even know where to start when it comes to security. In fact, they're probably as scared as anyone about cybersecurity and attackers and so on. So it's really nice that there's a very simple, easy, straightforward guide that lays out the best practices from this field and says, hey guys, here's where to start. Look at these things. Do you think that this is going to make a difference, Jack?
I do. And I think, I was going to bring up the fact that these people are non-technical. And in fact, they are more scared than you or I or most people, because they know that if anything happens untoward, if a machine fails, a power failure, that the microscope is going to be on them, and they're going to be, all the heat, all the pressure is coming right on them. Right. But because they're non-technical, I hope that the CISA is planning on going the next step and really getting down to looking at very specific technical recommendations. Right. There's only a few different ballot tabulation machines available. There's only a few different ways of running the elections, and it would be really great if the people who are the experts in cybersecurity could put together a more comprehensive, more technical, detailed guide that really says, when you're using this type of thing, these are the things you really need to be care of, right? Where you have to, even simple stuff like understanding and controlling thumb drive access, or user logins and passwords and resetting passwords, and all of the standard stuff that we as IT people and as cybersecurity folks do as standard practice. It's ingrained, it's second nature. We don't even think about it anymore. But the non-technical people who are elections officials, who have to deal with politicians as their bosses, who are very concerned about only one thing, and that's, did they win or did they lose the election? And if they lost the election, how can they fight against it? Right? We have to provide more tools and more technology for these people to, or I should say, not technology, but more guidelines about the tools and technology for them, so that they can really build a level of trust in the system for the public at large.
Now, there's a challenge, though, and that is that if you read the recommendations that they have, I'm concerned that some of these might have the opposite effect, that some of these might actually undermine the trust that the public has in the system. And so, for example, if you look at the application of OPSEC countermeasures section and the things that they suggest, a lot of these are things that kind of run counter to the sort of transparency that people in a democracy want from their elected officials and bureaucrats. Essentially, things like, don't talk about your job, don't let people know that you're monitoring elections, don't, lock down your social media accounts. Don't you have a bumper sticker that says where you work? Watch out for talking about things in public. I think a lot of people might feel that these sorts of recommendations are kind of acting counter to the way that they want government to be. But that being said, I'm just going to come out right here and now. Bureaucracy can help in security. Essentially, having a whole bunch of people whose job is big and boring and designed to kind of move the monster forward actually does help resist some of the challenges of information security. Because, as you know, a lot of these hacks and so on are based on people not doing things that they really ought to have done. If you look in the enterprise, it's people who didn't change their password, or took home a device that they weren't supposed to have, or whatever. Well, a lot of that can be mitigated through bureaucracy. Basically, if you've got to sign forms and get permissions and go through all this rigmarole to do things, well, then maybe you're not going to do those things, and you're not going to put this stuff at risk. So it strikes me that on the one hand, we have recommendations that seem, well, a little deep state. And on the other hand, that may be exactly what we need in order to keep these things from happening. But of course, it's all in people's minds too. I don't know, Jack, do you want one last thought on this? Is this really going to happen? And what would be the result of all this?
I think it is. When you say, is it really going to happen? I think, is security going to happen? And the answer is yes. There's enough focus on it today and enough concerns about it that we really are going to have a much more secure environment than we've ever had in the past. To me, the actual challenge isn't so much what we would actually call security through obscurity, which is really part of operational security. It's really much more, I'm much more concerned about um, politicians dissatisfied with the outcomes, making noise about it and raising unfounded fears simply because they're upset that they didn't win. And that's not a either, that's an either side of the political spectrum or all sides of the political spectrum issue, and it has to do with just people who are, they are emotionally invested in this, and their entire persona and lives are invested in and millions and millions of dollars, of course, invested in winning. And when they don't win, they look at any possible way that they can, particularly in close elections, where they can flip the results and win in the end. And that's, I think, probably our biggest risk today.
Yeah, and ultimately, there may be no protecting ourselves from crybabies, except to know that it's going to happen. And ultimately, we've got to, we got to stick to our guns and stick to our process. Really, that's sticking to the process is the best possible way to make sure that we get the outcome we need. Build a good process, stick to it.
Yep.
So thanks so much for joining us, Jack. It's been great having you at our field day events, and I really appreciate you bringing your perspective here to the rundown as well. Thanks so much for giving us your time today. Before we go, let's take a look at some of the other things that are going on this week. As I mentioned, Tom Hollingsworth is at Networking Field Day right now. In fact, it's going to be live streaming on Tech Field Day and TechStrong TV all day long today and tomorrow. We've got presentations from Hedgehog, Intel, Selector AI, CPacket, Arcus, as well as a roundtable discussion from the Networking Field Day delegates. You don't want to miss it. Again, just head to techfieldday.com or TechStrong TV or our LinkedIn page to catch those. And of course, you'll find recordings on YouTube. We are also going to be heading to Share Kansas City, August 5th through 7th. The Share is the longest running conference in the industry. It started with people literally sharing data tapes of mainframe programs and utilities. And now it is a great opportunity for people in that world to get on board with AI and DevOps. And we're actually bringing some AI and DevOps type people from the Tech Field Day community to Share this year. It's going to be really, really cool. We already have a sponsor lined up, a pop-up mainframe. They're going to talk about how you can use basically mainframe as a service. It's going to be super cool. We're also headed out to another AI field day, as well as an AI data infrastructure field day later in the year. So keep an eye out for that as we announce some of the sponsors there. These look like they're going to be absolutely huge events with big name sponsors that are going to be presenting big, long sessions, deep dives into building AI systems in the enterprise. AI is getting real, as we talk about here on the rundown. You'll see a lot of that at AI Field Day and AI Data Infrastructure Field Day. We're also going to be back with Edge Field Day, with Security Field Day, Cloud Field Day, and yes, we're going to announce Networking Field Day next tomorrow afternoon. So keep an eye on the Networking Field Day live stream to hear about when the next Networking Field Day is coming back. Thanks so much for watching the Gestalt IT Rundown this week and every week. You can catch new episodes every Wednesday as a YouTube video or in your favorite podcast application. Or you can tune in for rundown streaming on TechStrong TV and the TechStrong media portals. You can often catch us on other TechStrong and Futurum Group programs as well. You'll see me most Tuesdays on the TechStrong Gang. And of course, you'll find the rest of the Gestalt IT podcasts if you look for Utilizing Tech and the Tech Field Day podcast itself. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about all of the IT news of the week. But until then, for myself, for Tom Hollingsworth, and of course, for our good friend Jack Poller for joining us, here's wishing you and yours a perfect National Kitten Day.